Without glasses, it's extremely hard for me to see really anything. I tend to squint a lot if I don't wear them, and without them, I wouldn't be able to live my daily life in the way that I do now. So, glasses are one of the enabling technologies that I have to be grateful for in my life because without them, of course, as I've mentioned before, I wouldn't be able to live my life. But where do these technologies come from, and why do we need to make them a much more bigger deal in the modern age? I'm Avan, and this is Avanexplains, back again with another weekly video, and this time we're asking the question, what are enabling technologies? Greetings, fellow scholar, and welcome back to this week's episode of Avanexplains. Beijing Globals is less than 3 weeks away, and I hope to see many of you there. And if you're not going to be able to come to the Globals, I wish you the best of luck at your own Globals. But obviously, as a result of that, this week we need to start studying, or at least we need to ramp up the studying gauge to 11. This week on Avan's Alpaca Resources, we announced the release of new Kahoots, Quizlets, and of course this new video that will hopefully help you understand one of the curriculum topics better. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. When we talk about enabling technologies, which is what our science curriculum is all about, we generally refer to one of two things. We refer to either a technology that allows us to live our life in the way that we do, or at least help overcome some sort of disability, or a technology that allows human beings to exceed their natural capacities and unlock the power of nature through the means of scientific technological advancements. So obviously within the first category, this includes things like glasses, prosthetics, and wheelchairs, which we'll be talking about in this video. Now the second category is obviously batteries, mobile phones, or any of those sort of gizmos that we can talk about for ages and that are already in our science curriculum that help make life around the house so much easier. But for now, let's get straight into the actual disabling technologies that allow us to disable our disabilities, if you will. So first up is prosthetics. Now you probably already have heard of prosthetics, and these are basically replacements for any limbs or appendages that humans have lost either through some sort of biological condition or through indeed injuries and indeed in wartime. These are very sort of common replacements for any limbs that were missing. Now, prosthetics have been around for as long as humans have been able to work metal and leather into different shapes. The first recorded example of a prosthetic was actually found next to an ancient Egyptian mummy, and that prosthetic was for a big toe. Not something you generally think a prosthetic would be for, but then again, back then these prosthetics were more to fill up the actual appendage than to simply serve a purpose. Back then, prosthetics were not able to move around with the same sort of degree to which you were able to move around your fingers or indeed your hands. So you obviously had to compensate by making something look like it was the real deal. Now, over ancient history, we have seen different examples of prosthetics. One of the most famous examples is the Roman Capua leg, a bronze case for a fake leg that was likely owned by a Roman soldier around 300 BC. Now, as history progressed on, different regions of the world produced different prosthetics. And in the Middle Ages, one of the key examples of prosthetic development was the inclusion of hinges. With hinges, now you had prosthetic arms and legs that could actually move around. Granted, they still didn't have the same functionality that our legs do, but they could still provide something similar to what the actual biological part would have been able to do had it still been attached onto the human. Now, over the next 200 years, governments and companies and individuals would make their own advancements in prosthetics, giving it personal touches such as intricate designs, making it more functional, or even making it sort of more complex. But you have to remember that prosthetics aren't something that can be mass produced, or at least not yet, because prosthetics are meant to be for an individual who has lost a part of their body. Not every individual is different, and therefore making a universal prosthetic that somehow fits on all humans isn't as easy as making universal clothing that fits on all genders and all body sizes. Now, Over the course of the American Civil War, the development of prosthetics began to increase because as more veterans came back with missing limbs, it was clear that the government needed to play a larger role in manufacturing the replacements for these limbs. And of course, we have this common belief and this common trend that war is the mother of invention. And because necessity is the mother of invention, war is therefore the mother of necessity in some way. But through World War One and World War Two, and obviously many other wars, the development of prosthetics has continued to grow. During World War One, governments tried to set up prosthetic factories where soldiers would be given free prosthetics based on whatever limb that had gone missing. And some of the footage is truly either inspiring or truly downright unusual, depending on your own mental preferences. But for now, prosthetics have been complicated with cranks, gears, straps, and other mechanical functions. But the true development and the pinnacle of development for prosthetics today is being able to make them replicate the bone or the muscle that they were meant to replace. And one of the biggest enhancements is thought controlled prosthetics, things that humans can control with their own minds as opposed to having to actually move them about with their other still attached hand. Our next up is hearing aids, and frankly, some of my friends might require this one there at school. Hearing aids are not the same as cochlear implants. They are not devices that can somehow make a deaf person hear noises again. They are merely meant to amplify sounds so that someone who is hard of hearing in one ear or both ears can understand what is being said to them without having to ask someone to repeat it. Now, before we delve into how they work, let's obviously review the history of hearing aids. Before hearing aids, we have ear trumpets. These were basically brass or metallic funnels that amplified any incoming sound waves and funneled them directly into the user's ears. Now, while these did work in the 17th and 18th century, they were very, very, very impractical. You had to carry one around the whole time with you, and it wasn't exactly ideal to have that always having to be held up because obviously you only had one hand free. Now, once electricity became a bigger part of the cities of the West, people began to realize that telephone receivers were actually very good at amplifying sounds for partially deaf people. It was actually another famous electricity mogul by the name of Thomas Alva Edison who took the technology to its newest interpretation back then. Carbon transmitters. Now, these were meant to be used within telephones, but he found that they could also be used within handheld devices to amplify sound within an electrical signal by 15 decibels, about half the amount of what's necessary to understand what's being said. Now, in the turn of the 20th century to the 1920s, these were implemented in vacuum tube hearing aids, and these allowed the sounds to be amplified by 70 decibels, which is more than double what was needed by someone who is hard of hearing. But again, these tubes were extremely bulky and not practical for everyday use. You wouldn't want to have to lug one around with you every time you went out of the house. A small wooden box often had to be hung on your neck, and it wasn't ideal to have to carry that around with you either. But it was only after the Second World War, gee, don't we love developing stuff after wars, that sounds became more amplifiable, if you will, if that's not even a word, but the unit became more compact. You had pocket-sized hearing aids being produced that could be fitted into your pocket or is slipped underneath some sort of garment or even hidden beneath your underneath your ear. Albeit there were a mess of wires that tangled up commonly, but it was a step in the right direction. Now, one of the most famous companies here is Raytheon Corps, and you're going to have to remember them because they pop up a lot in our science curriculum. They could finally create hearing aids that could slip within the ear as well as behind it, so it was subtle, it was practical, and it was also very functional. Since then, digital technology has allowed us to actually choose which sounds we want to amplify and which sort of frequencies we don't want to hear, sort of what you've seen if you've ever watched Up. Now, silicon transistors have also shrunk our hearing aid size massively, which is a good step. The next step for our hearing aids is to make them practically invisible to the naked eye. A sort of implant within the ear or even within the brain would be far more functional, or at least far more impressive, than an actual object you'd have to carry around and fit onto your physical being. Now we get on to walkers. Now, unlike other technologies, walkers have not actually developed as much as the others. You might know a walker from its other name, the Zimmer frame. Now, this was named after the namesake UK-based company, the Zimmer Company, that mass manufactured them. And a walker is pretty straightforward. It's a frame that's slightly wider than the user that's meant to allow them to use their arms to walk forward, especially if they have a crippling back injury or they can't walk upright without any assistance from their own. Now, they generally have wheels or tennis balls on them, and again, if you've seen Carl from Up, then you probably already know what these look like. Oh God, Carl, thank you so much for being a great model of these enabling technologies for us. Now, in the early 1950s, a man by the name of William Cribbs Robb received a US patent for his own version of the walking aid. And obviously, there'd be multiple developments over history, but the general concept of a walking aid is still pretty much the same as it was when it was first developed in the 20th century. And there's not much of a way around developing them, because with a walking aid, you need to be able to provide the user with a sturdy frame and something that can move along with them. You can't make it smaller or bigger because obviously it has to be for the user, but you can, however, make it much easier to use and much more intuitive to hold than anything that we once had in the past. Now, the last but certainly not least important technology on our list is wheelchairs, and it's one of the oldest on our list. We have ancient artworks depicting ancient Greek and even ancient Chinese persons using wheelchairs. Now, obviously, wheelchairs are for those with biological conditions that don't allow them to stand up or make use of their lower body as much as a normal human being would. But the Europeans that we associate with wheelchairs would not catch on until 1595, when some unknown inventor created an invalid chair for King Philip II of Spain. And in 1655, a paraplegic watchmaker by the name of Stephen Farfler made a self-propelling chair of 3 wheels. It actually looks pretty cool. It looks like some sort of bathtub that you got stuck in and wouldn't bother to leave. I honestly wouldn't mind rolling around in one of those for a day. Now, in 1783, John Dawson would create the Bath wheelchair, and it again had 3-wheel designs, 2 at the front and 1 at the back. But it wasn't until 1869 that someone would be able to patent the wheelchair with rear push wheels and front caster wheels. Caster wheels are the sort of things you find on supermarket trolleys that allow them to rotate in either direction based on where you're pushing the trolley. Now, over the next 45 years, inventors would add in more innovations, from hollow rubber wheels to push rims, those small bars on the outside that allow you to sort of push your chair along without any assistance. But it wasn't until 1932 that infamous engineer Harry Jennings and his paraplegic friend Herbert Everest would found Everest and Jennings, a monopolizing company on wheelchairs because of their tubular frames, their caster wheels, and their 4-wheel design that we now know today. And it wasn't until Canadian inventor George Clean invented the first electric wheelchair after World War II, and it was powered by an electric battery that allowed the user to control where it went. And now these wheelchairs are obviously more expensive, but they're generally more enabling than the conventional wheelchair, which requires you to use a lot of muscle power or always have someone constantly tending to you. Even now, wheelchairs are going to be mobilized and revolutionized again. As always, we see a common trend here. Wheelchairs are going to be revolutionized to be connected to the user's mind so that you can just think of where you're going to go and the wheelchair will go in that direction. But it's going to be interesting to see how wheelchairs and the other enabling technologies evolve in the years and decades to come. Perhaps in 20 years' time, there'll be an age where everything is controlled by thought, and no injury, no matter how crippling, cannot be solved by the wonders of technology that we have been able to invent. But What do you guys think about enabling technologies, and what do you guys really want to see next on this channel? I hope this video taught you something, and I hope that you benefit from the Kahoots and quizwords that will be posted on Avon's Alpaca resources in the weeks to come. This is Avon Fada, Avon Explains, signing out.